Hi everyone, my name is Jasper Van Rijn. I'm the head of software engineering and design at Drax. And today I'm going to share some of my experiences about when exploring the possibilities of event-driven architectures. I've been active exclusively in the energy domain in the context of both startups and corporate environments. So I mentioned the energy domain as it has consistently proven to be a complex one, and time again it highlights the key benefit of event-driven architectures, i.e. how they enable you to model complex business scenarios in a manageable way. So as I mentioned, energy is an inherently complex domain, and those two words, complex and domain, many years ago got me into domain-driven design, and this was really my great gateway into event-driven architectures, and I've reflected on the relevance of that since. And if we compare the words, not the words architecture and design, because that's a whole different talk, but if we compare event-driven to domain-driven, it's clear that events are the most generic concepts that shape a domain, i.e. things that happen to create outcomes, and therefore the two approaches are complementary and almost, if not almost, analogous. So this is a reflection of my experience looking back over the last 15 years. So if you're starting your EDA journey or you're looking to move it up a gear, hopefully you'll find something useful in this talk. There's some questions in the chat, and I'll be available for live Q&A afterwards. So I'll start with the prerequisites to an EDA effort. Now, prerequisites might be a bit strong because, as we'll see, you can start an EDA effort at any scale. But I'll break them down into sort of nice to haves and key enablers that can mean the difference between success and failure of an EDA effort. So it's worth just pausing for a second what good looks like for an event-driven architecture. So good looks like loosely coupled, business-aligned services. And it follows that unless we're in a trivial domain, that our target state will end up with many, many services. So this leads me to my first recommendation, or nice to have, which is keep an eye on your service management maturity. Does the way you do service management currently in your organization support a service-based architecture? Are there any bottlenecks in there that, the moving to a landscape with many, many different services would create a problem? Are you expecting potentially for functions to, are you creating cognitive overload for particular functions? If you can identify opportunities to adapt early, then they'll put you in good stead. This is especially relevant when moving to a microservices architecture, for example, from a monolithic one. So if you can adopt something like ITIL 4, which is a nice fit early on or in parallel, then you'll mitigate quite a lot of risks around service management. So I'll move on to what I consider to be the key enablers. So hindsight is a wonderful thing. And these enablers are the things that I've identified as answers to the question, how could that have been easier? So to start with, business architecture. Feels like a no-brainer, but it can easily be dismissed as too hard or not a technology problem. But it really defines the context of your event-driven architecture. The architecture, the domain will frame the conversations that you have with your stakeholders at all levels of design. So really, it's important that that's in place. It seems like a no-brainer, like I said, but ultimately, it's not always easily available. The next must-have, I think, is your infrastructure strategy. Cloud providers provide really good accelerators to EDA adoption. However, if you make a choice to adopt those tools, then on-prem will easily provide different challenges. So ultimately, you have to be able to put your finger on the infrastructure strategy, because otherwise you may end up having made the wrong decisions about using those tools. The next one, I think, is a clear statement of why. Why are we doing EDA? It's important to generate sustained buy-in. So ultimately, one of the options you can look at is look at your current challenges, not just in the business domain, but also maybe in your operational areas, What are the things that are causing your business current pain? So is it low agility? Is it cost of integration, unmanageable complexity? Those things are really important to just clearly articulate and probably have to repeat them in order to really create that sustained buy-in. And then there's the 4 basic patterns of an event-driven architecture. So I picked these up from a talk by Martin Fowler in 2017, and they just lift the lid a little bit on what is event-driven. So we've got their event notification, which is the real sort of value add services notifying other services that things have happened, which is really aligned to application integration. We've got event carried state transfer, which is more of a data integration, and then there's the two last ones, event sourcing and CQRS, which really need to be approached with caution because they bring all kinds of complexities. They're not necessarily bad, but you would probably only really look at them once your EDA effort has matured and your confidence has grown. So these are the must-haves. Now I'll just move on to a couple of patterns that I've thought of, which I found useful. So the first one is the topic architecture. So the context here is your EDA adoption is low or non-existent, and you're just starting out. Now, the problem is that an EDA can easily become a victim of its own success. So like we said earlier, good looks like multiplication of services all interacting, and that basically leads to an explosion in your event catalog, and that needs to be managed. So really, a topic architecture allows you to define some simple rules about how events are named, policies, auditing, and all those kind of things, which means it all becomes a lot more manageable and you avoid the chaos of an unmanaged event catalog. Something else to consider is how easy is it to extend a topic architecture and how will it evolve? So topic architecture is really, in my opinion, the least reversible aspect of your design when it comes to an EDA. So the next pattern is passive-aggressive events. So you're conducting low-level design in an EDA, in an event-driven architecture, and there's a risk that logical coupling creeps in, basically making your system harder to understand over time. So really, the solution there is to make sure that whenever people talk about events, we make sure that they are not including any kind of a hint of intent, so that we are actually dealing with facts, and that actually the events are pure events, not kind of masquerading commands that are actually telling things to do stuff. So ultimately, the event catalog can help there. It allows you to govern the meaning of events, and that's really a way to prevent the rot setting in. If the rot sets in and you start to get that kind of logical coupling, then you're probably looking at some quite expensive refactoring over time to undo that. So this is really something to be on your guard for continuously throughout all phases of design. The next pattern is the distinction between a broker and a bus. Now, a broker is inherently centralized, whereas a bus can be federated, which has its advantages, because if you don't need, in a bus, you couldn't use a framework, which means you're not relying on centralized or deploying specialized infrastructure to enable your EDA. So ultimately, but it does have its limitations. The centralization that a broker brings allows you to speed the developers up by not having to repeat continuously the same address the same infrastructural concerns. But it's important to go in eyes wide open, knowing the limitations of the bus pattern and the consequences of the broker pattern. So the next one is that of the platform team. So you've decided, or you're deciding on the technology for your EDA effort in either the bus or the broker style. But the problem is that the service design of the proposed architecture requires capabilities that are not currently in place or aligned. So it's important to make sure that you're not duplicating effort within development teams in relation to event-driven infrastructure. So this is where a platform team can come in. They will take the responsibility of looking after the infrastructure that an event-driven architecture requires. The risk here is if you have multiple teams and they're duplicating effort, then your event-driven architecture effort can start to look more expensive than a traditional approach. And this really is the opposite of what you're trying to do. A platform team can be targeted with developing a thinnest viable platform, which means really from a application developer's point of view, knowledge of a topic and the knowledge of where the broker is really all that's needed, which can then be governed by the topic architecture. So the next pattern is bring an expert on side. If you're trying to generate buy-in and de-risk your EDA effort, and your organization might be risk averse, or you might not quite have the momentum to generate the interest in such an effort, what we can do there is we can create some partnerships, look for partnerships with vendors, industry bodies, user groups, find reference architectures and reference implementations that we can compare and generate interest within the organization. As a good example recently in the UK energy market, where the regulator has decided to implement an event-driven architecture for the infrastructure of the industry. So that's a real opportunity to champion an EDA solution internally. The next pattern is to widen the application a little bit. So there's no reason to limit the application of an event-driven architecture to just business problems. We can also look at areas such as HR, finance, employee engagement. The events are everywhere, and really, if we find opportunities to use event-driven architecture to create efficiencies, we can champion those, and that's something that you can target your platform team with, to look a little bit beyond the kind of the core business features, if you like, and try and make the operations run smoother. The next pattern is the question of why wait. So quite often at the analysis and design stage, the non-functional requirements can kind of settle for the way things are currently working. So more traditional integration patterns like batches. It's quite a useful thing to ask the question, why are we waiting? So it's a consequence of the decoupling that we've enabled with events, that we can't make assumptions about how patient our consumers will be. So if we have an event, why would we wait to publish it? Because there might be a need for that to be heard straight away. So asking the question, why wait, whenever you're in design discussions is quite often quite useful. Another design discussion pattern here is the idea of logical ownership. So your EDA effort's established, it needs to be more fully exploited, but at the analysis stage, existing approaches may not respect the concept of logical owner as the authoritative source of an event. So as we said, an event is a fact. A fact has to be stated by somebody with authority. So that could be a system, a capability, or an actor. But continually sort of bringing that concept into the conversation at design stage about what is the authoritative source of this event. It's central to the pub/sub pattern, and again can be governed using the topic architecture and the event catalog. So the idea of tailored middleware is a solution to when you've chosen to adopt the broker style in your EDA effort, and it's not clear, or you're struggling to really articulate what the implications of that are. The broker isn't simply middleware. The broker is middleware that is tailored by way of your topic architecture to your business. So that's really a subtle difference, and it really articulates that it needs a platform team to look after it. So the concept of middleware has been around for a while, and also message-oriented middleware has been around for a while. But really, in an event-driven architecture, there's a level of tailoring which goes beyond just deploying a platform. It's really tailored to the business. So that's a phrase I've used to get that concept across a few times successfully. So the next pattern is that of consistent metaphors. So you're championing an EDA effort, and you're seeking to change hearts and minds to event thinking. There can be resistance to change, and sometimes the concepts, or people don't have the time to really grasp the concepts. So actually thinking of metaphors you can use consistently actually helps. People can refer back to them, they stick. So for example, the idea of a postal service and all the infrastructure that goes around it is a useful one when talking about messaging systems. Accounting ledgers are basically the same as event sourcing. You basically collect a set of transactions, and then you play them back, and that gives you your balance. And this concept of logical owners allowing you to kind of model conversations using events is quite powerful too. But the key thing here is to use user-friendly metaphors and be consistent. But you do have to exercise some caution to make sure that they're not disproven or their credibility can be challenged. So it takes a little bit of thinking, that one. And then lastly, but not least, is make it fun. I think if we can make our EDA effort fun for all those involved, then I think its chances of success are a lot higher. So the exercise of gathering requirements can be quite boring, but actually when we're doing things like running event storming workshops, then suddenly these things become a lot more interactive and a lot more productive. So if we can champion the simplicity the events can create, that means that the momentum will increase. So there are quite a few modeling tools. A lot of them that visualize event-driven architectures are really focused on the runtime view. So there's not that many design time tools that can bring an EDA to life. So one experiment I did was I used Scratch, which has an event-driven model in the background that you can use to model these events and actually bring these things to life quite effectively in quite a fun way. So that's really a good one to end on. So my advice would be to have fun and good luck. Thank you.